My name is Anuj Dawar. My title is Professor of Logic and Algorithms in the Computer Laboratory in Cambridge. So we are a department of about 40 faculty members, of which I'm one, and my role in here is teaching and research, and I focus mainly on theoretical computer science. Right, I think as far back as I can remember, from when I was maybe 6 years old, I imagined myself being a scientist when I grew up. It's what I would tell people when they asked me what I wanted to grow up to be. I think by the time I was finishing school, it had become more concretely an ambition to do physics. I wanted to be a physicist. And about the time when I was deciding what to do at university, I went to the Indian Institute of Technology in Delhi, and I spoke to some professors there who told me that I might consider studying computer science, because the reason why I was interested in physics, they told me, was because it was the place, it was because I had certain mathematical problem solving skills, and that was the place in the subject in school which had most where they'd been most useful, as it were. So, and they thought I would find computer science interesting for that reason. And there was also a certain amount of peer pressure to do something practical, and so I decided to try computer science. Once I started studying it, I very quickly found myself drawn to the more theoretical parts of the subjects, the more mathematically challenging ones, and that's where my interest lay. So, well, after my first degree, I went to study in the US. I did a master's degree at the University of Delaware and a PhD at the University of Pennsylvania. And I dabbled in a few different areas, but ended up doing my PhD in the area of logic, working with a supervisor who was in the philosophy department, and was in the use of mathematical logic in computer science. And that's how I got here. I was actually fascinated by lots of different things. Going back a little bit earlier, I was fascinated by history. I mean, when I remember when I was 9 years old, I used to read for fun my sister's history textbooks, and she was 6 years older than me. But so I've had a lot of different interests, but it was always mathematics and physics that really caught my imagination. I had a bit of a disrupted schooling in that. So we lived in Brussels roughly from the age of 10 to the age of 14, when I went to a French medium school, and this meant when I was 14 we moved back to India. I ended up being homeschooled for a couple of years, and I did my O-levels and A-levels essentially as a private candidate. So yes, well, I taught myself a lot of mathematics and physics. And one of the inspirations was my father, who, though he wasn't scientifically trained himself, would encourage me by coming home every evening and asking me to spend an hour explaining to him what I'd learned. And so I would essentially give him a lecture on things I'd been studying. And that's why I think of him as one of my inspiring teachers. He says the same about me, incidentally. So I work broadly in the area of theoretical computer science, which is concerned with mathematical models of computation. So understanding the process of computation as a mathematical subject. Within that, I work specifically in computational complexity, which is concerned with understanding what makes certain computational problems inherently difficult. Now, by computational problem, I mean just the sort of thing you might write a program for a computer to solve. And when I say difficult, I don't mean that it's hard to write a program. It might be easy to come up with a program, but any program we come up with is highly inefficient. It consumes a lot of resources, whether time or memory space or various other things. And so the aim is to understand what makes certain problems inherently intractable in this sense. Within that subject, I have a particular angle where I study the complexity of problems from the lens of definability. And that's about looking at just how we specify a problem in a certain formalized language, and then understanding from the complexity of that specification what the complexity of the computation would be. Right. So the subject of computational complexity is maybe a little bit more than 40 years old. It started in the early 70s, and one of the challenging open problems in there is what's known as the P versus NP question. This is about understanding the intractability, or maybe I should say explaining the intractability of a certain very natural class of problems, which are called the NP problems. These are problems where once you have a solution, it's fairly easy to check that it is a solution, but finding a solution is difficult. And explaining why it is difficult, what makes this class of problems intractable, is the challenge, and it remains an open question after 40 years of research. But in that time, a lot of effort has been devoted, and it's become an area which generates its own question as people come up with approaches towards this problem, to solving it or understanding it. That raises further questions, which generates further research areas and so on. So it's, I think still a very exciting area with lots of new ideas coming up. Within that, I have a particular interest. Currently, I'm studying classification of a certain class of problems called constraint satisfaction problems. And I also want to understand the role of symmetry in the complexity of problems, because it seems that understanding the certain symmetries that occur in problems can both help reduce complexity, but also in many cases explain why certain things are complex. And what I'm particularly interested in is the study of symmetry has a long tradition in mathematics, and I think looking at problems this way would allow us to bring in certain methods from mathematics which would be new to the subject. So I think I would say this for theoretical computer science of the kind I do in general. The biggest advantage, well, the biggest asset would be a love of mathematics, and I think those who have it know what that means. I mean, it's particularly an appreciation of, sort of the elegance and beauty of the subject. I advise, students I take on for a PhD, I find those with a background in mathematics, I find are slide into computer science, theoretical computer science, much more comfortably, even than sometimes people who have studied computer science. So I would certainly advise students to study as much mathematics as you can. A good mathematics background in school, say A-level mathematics and further mathematics, is an enormous asset, not just in doing theoretical computer science, not just in the sciences, but also in practical areas of computer science. I think it's highly valued. So yes, I would say I wish I'd studied more mathematics myself.